Turn it over to you. Welcome, Marina.
Fabulous. Hello, everybody. What a group. Hi, Cheney. I see some friendly faces. I see some VA.gov. I see a bunch of state folks. I see some PIFs. So this is a fun mix. Thank you so much for coming. So I am going to share some stories for the first hour. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go along. And if I can answer one as we go, I'm happy to do that. And otherwise, I'll stop at the hour and we can dive into some Q&A there. So you already heard who I am. So I've been a Fed. I now work a lot with state governments, and I also do consulting in the public and private sector as a crisis engineer. So I've got hopefully a little bit for everybody in terms of perspective. And I co-authored this book with Nick, who was my first boss when I was in the federal government, when I joined as a Presidential Innovation Fellow. Nick teaches at Harvard now and is also a venture capitalist at Insight Partners. So he kind of brings those additional angles to our bureaucracy hacking. So I like to start off with this story because I hope it makes me seem a little bit more accessible. So when I started as the Chief Technology Officer of the Department of Veterans Affairs, anybody that doesn't know the VA, it's an enormous agency. It's the largest civilian agency, and it's about the equivalent of a Fortune 10 company. And when I joined, it had a $5 billion annual IT budget and 18,000 people in the IT organization. And I was told that my job description as the CTO of the agency was to redefine the art of the possible for how America honors and serves its veterans. So itty bitty little mission. And to do that, on my first day, I had 0 people and $0 of budget. One of the first things I tried to do was get a dry erase board for my office because I was like, oh, I could brainstorm different ideas. And I was told I didn't have enough of an office supply budget to get a dry erase board because a GSA board cost $105 and I only had $99. And I definitely couldn't bring my own from home because that would violate like OSHA rules and the Anti-Deficiency Act. And it was explained to me all the reasons why I could not have a dry erase board. So I was pretty depressed. I did not feel like I was going to be able to get anything done. And to make matters worse, I had just spent the previous 6 months auditing the VA from the White House. I had been asked to look at how the VA processed disability claims, which at the time was probably the worst backlog that the VA had. The VA was on like the Daily Show with Jon Stewart because the offices were literally buckling under the weight of unprocessed paper claims that took 4 or 5 years to process. And so I was, again, auditing from the White House, which made me extremely popular when I came to the VA, and nobody would let me into their meetings. So I was really stumped as to how I was supposed to get anything done, let alone accomplish this big mission that I had been given. But as I sat there at my desk, I was literally all I had was a little pile of paper clips that my predecessor had presumably left behind in the desk. But it reminded me of this story about this blogger named Kyle, who through a succession of barters traded a red paperclip, like a regular red paperclip, for a house that he subsequently lived in. And so I'm looking at my pile of paperclips thinking, how can I trade these for anything, something, so that I have a resource to get something done? And at about that moment, Bonnie, who was the head of the executive secretary pool, popped her head in my office. And she said, hey, Marina, have you seen Green Pack 42? And I said, I don't know what that is. Nobody will talk to me. I don't know my way around, but I have nothing else to do, so I'll help you find it. And so we wandered around the VA headquarters building, which is a fairly large 12-story, very wide building, looking for Green Pack 42. And what is a Green Pack? I didn't know, but I quickly learned it's a green file folder with the number 42 written on the front. And what goes in a green pack was anytime that another agency or the White House wrote an official letter to the VA's official response would go in this green folder, and anybody that had to weigh in on the response or approve it, that folder would end up on their desk. And it quickly became apparent to me that the executive secretary pool spent most of their day wandering the office building looking for the green packs. And so I was like, ooh, what if we printed a barcode on the front of these folders, and then when it landed on your desk, you sort of checked it in so that they could always see whose desk the green folder had been on the last. And this being the VA, there was a box of unused barcode scanners on the 8th floor in a closet. So passed those out. I wrote like the world's smallest Ruby on Rails script. It took me maybe 90 minutes to print a barcode. which is, I don't know if anybody's familiar with barcodes, but a barcode, the spacing between the lines it's basically numbers. So it's definitely not a secure way to store any information. When you scan it, it just reads the different numbers across the lines and then fills it in. So from my perspective, given my tool set and my skills, that was something that did not take me a lot of time or effort. But what I realized later is it was something that was virtually impossible for the executive secretary pool to access, right? So it was in a really amazing paperclip trade, even though I didn't plan it out that way. So now I had political capital. I had made friends with some of the most important people in any government agency, which is the secretarial pool, right? They thought I was a wizard, a magical wizard who could print barcodes on folders, even though from my perspective, with my skill set, it had been 90 minutes of work that I was happy to help with. And I wasn't quite sure what to do with this newfound political capital, except that myself and a couple of other presidential innovation fellows that were at the VA at the time, we had started brainstorming like, okay, if we did have resources, if we did have people, if we did have money, what might we do at the VA? What does a 21st century VA look like? And at this point, it was 2013. So we were like well into the 21st century, but that's okay. And so we started laying that out on Post-it notes stuck to the wall. And then Molly, who is an amazing graphic designer, turned all our Post-it notes into a beautiful printed booklet that I spent literally an entire paycheck at Kinko's printing on this blue, thick, glossy paper. And so I said to the secretarial pool, like, hey, maybe you could get me meetings with my peers. Like maybe I could share this and get their feedback. And that blue glossy, as it was called, ended up taking off kind of like wildfire, where people were excited about the idea. Among other things, we had a vision of like, what if the VA had like a central digital experience that was really good for veterans? And at the time, the VA had 1,564 different websites, yet you could do almost nothing on them. They were like informational. You could apply for virtually none of VA's 83 benefit lines online. So I had this vision, started passing it around, used this political capital in my second paperclip trade to get access to like people voice meeting spots, right? Like you want to meet with Helen before lunch, or you want to meet with Dan, before he goes away for the weekend. And as that happened, you guys may have heard of this little website called healthcare.gov, right? The launch that went super, super well. So that happened October 1st, a few months into my time at the VA. And those of you that were around then remember that was also a government shutdown. So the website launched. It was a catastrophe on many levels, and the government shut down on the same day. The VA was slated to launch the next federal website after healthcare.gov. President Obama was going to announce it. It was called the GI Bill Comparison Tool. And long story short, it was a calculator. So there was no login, there was no application, there was no form. It was just a calculator where you entered some basic information about your military service, and it would help you determine which chapter of the GI Bill, which is for higher education benefits, you should pick to get the maximum benefits. Because if you pick the quote unquote wrong one, you can't go back and you might be out tens of thousands of dollars of higher education benefits, which is a huge problem, right? So the idea here was solid. But what the VA learned from healthcare.gov was like, hey, if you're going to launch a website, maybe you should performance test it. You should load test it, see how many users it could have. So the VA load tested it, and it crashed at 8 users. Pretty bad. And so the White House was like, you are absolutely not launching this website like over our dead bodies. And someone from the executive secretary pool was in that meeting. And they thought, Marina can print barcodes. Maybe Marina can help make the tool work. So they came and talked to me. Those of you that are more technical, like neither one really had nothing to do with the other, but that's okay. And I said, I will find a way to help you. And so myself and the other presidential innovation fellows got together over a weekend and rewrote the tool in JavaScript. And we had no money, right? We couldn't put it anywhere. So we got IT to approve us using GitHub Pages as a free place where we could publish this tool. And we were able to do that with 2 bureaucracy hacks. One was we pointed to the fact that the Office of the US CIO published guidance on GitHub Pages. So we were like, look, if OMB and the White House are to use this tool, we should be able to use it for totally non-PII, non-sensitive information. And then the second thing was they were like, well, how on earth will you prove that it's going to scale? Unlike the previous, option that cost $1 million and didn't load. And I said, well, it hosts the official Miley Cyrus fan club. So that should be like the proof that this will work. And that I filled out the paperwork about the Miley Cyrus fan club, and it was approved and it went forward. President Obama announced the tool. It did not crash. It lasted, and that ended up being the basis for what over many years, I think some of you in the audience there, became the current va.gov, which is like a SAMI award-winning, really excellent digital experience. So I tell that story to share that, like, sometimes we look at bureaucracies and we think like, oh, that person in the C-suite has all the power. They have all the resources. They're going to be able to get so much done. And I can say that that was definitely not the case for me. It took me years to get my first hire. It took me years to get my first dollars of budget. It took creative things about, using Miley Cyrus to your advantage. But that's to encourage you that kind of wherever you are, you might have a paperclip. So thinking hard about like what resources and skills you have that you might be able to trade with others. And you never know, you might make a kind of a wacky trade with legal and then a wacky trade with someone in the food service. And then that trade is the one that will get you to the relationship that can kind of unlock what you really need. A corollary to this is building your cuirass. So a cuirass is a term from Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle. In the book, it's a religious term, sort of, and it means that people that God has hidden around the planet to accomplish a goal together. In our book, Nick and I use it in a more secular term, which is to say that, like, so often we approach bureaucracies thinking that there are people hidden around that are conspiring to stop us. They're conspiring to slow us down. They're not giving us the approval we need. They're not giving us the budget that we need. And what if you turn that on its head and think about like who might be hidden around your agency, or maybe even partner agencies or outside partners who, despite whatever their official job title or role may be, can help work with you to get your goals accomplished together. And my favorite story here, early on in my time at VA, so I had helped save the GI Bill comparison tool. So I had some political capital, but I still had literally $0. And I had my first opportunity ever to get a budget. And it was going to be like over $3 million, which is, I still think $3 million is a lot of money. But when you have $0, it's especially a lot of money in government. And I wanted this money to build a pilot of what the unified, really excellent digital experience for veterans could be. So I was given this opportunity, and basically there was this contract that was ending in 2 weeks. And if I could move about 1,000 pages of written content, they were articles about employment. If I could move those 1,000 pages off of the current website and onto GitHub Pages, where it was going to be free, and I already had the approvals, I was going to be able to recoup some of the cost savings from not renewing that contract. But the problem was I had 2 weeks and 1,000 pages to move, and each page required a little bit of HTML coding. So not like a lot of coding, but there just weren't enough hours in a day for me to do this. And I'm thinking through, like, I desperately need this money to help improve the veterans experience here at the VA. How can I do this? And I was complaining about this problem to the security guard on the 12th floor when it occurred to me that he had a computer and a little bit of time on his hands. And so I asked him if he had any interest in learning HTML coding and helping me with this project. And he said, oh, absolutely, I'm going to come on my lunch break. And he came with the security guards from the other 11 floors. They all brought their computers. They all learned HTML code. And we beat, not just met, but beat that 2-week deadline. And now I had millions of dollars that we were able to build into the proof point for, again, what today is an award-winning digital experience. I don't think I ever would have imagined that the security guards were going to be my path forward on that, right? But they were. Most of them eventually left the VA for IT jobs. So I may have also created a slight security guard hiring crisis, but whatever, in the grand scheme of things, they're all doing really well. And so I really learned, at this point, I have the executive secretary pool and security guards, and we are a force to be reckoned with. And that was pretty cool to learn and has changed my appreciation for official org charts by a lot. So you want to look for your cuirass wherever they may be. They are probably in unexpected places. And I don't mean this in a disingenuous way. I'm not telling you to go sleazily network with everybody in every corner of your agency, but just to me, this is about building genuine relationships with people and then pooling your resources to accomplish shared goals. And at the VA, we eventually went on to name our official cuirass the Grilled Cheese Club, where we would get together once a month. We would make grilled cheese, and we would share what we were up to on the team by the time that I had an actual team and an actual project. And that served an additional benefit, which is our cuirass had, not just security and executive secretary pool, but at that point had some folks from legal, some folks from procurement, some folks from finance. And it helped on at least two levels. One was when we gave a presentation, they often had really good advice about things that we hadn't thought about, or roadblocks we wouldn't expect, or legal challenges that we should watch out for. Or if they were like, oh, you're going to brief that to Helen, make sure it has the privacy policy on page 2, because she's going to like get you if you don't have that. And the other thing that it did was it enabled all these champions in other part of the agency to advocate for us when we weren't there, right? The laws of physics are that I can only be in one place at one time. And so very frequently when you're doing an innovative project, when you're trying to get something new done, there's a whole rumor mill, right? And it was like, oh, Marina's skipping the IT approval process, or Marina and her team are, not going through the official budget process the way that they should be. But we were. And because we had gotten to tell that story on a consistent basis to our Carass, when they were in other meetings, they could correct people. They could say, oh, no, actually, Marina is in the ATO process, or Marina has that approval, or Marina did fill out that form. And I think that that's just another benefit of having a Carass. And I want to shout out, yes, I love the Cultivate. I should have mentioned this. Cultivate the Carass was a Post-it note that our colleague, Jake Brewer, had put on his computer monitor. Jake was very tragically killed in a bicycle accident while he worked at the White House. And so we named that chapter in his honor. So related to the Carass is figuring out the real org chart. So we all know the org chart, and it's got the squares and the lines and whatever. And that's not actually how anything gets done in a public or a private organization. You want to figure out the real org chart. And there's all sorts of components of that. And we have a long list in the book of kind of things to consider as you're drawing out your map. Who has the purchase card, right? And again, I don't mean this in a manipulative way at all, and I'm always slightly cautious about coming across that way, but like if someone has a purchase card, go get coffee with them, become their friend. That might really help you out later. Get to know what their favorite lunch is. Who used to work together, right? Like, how do people like to receive information? Who is the actual decision maker versus who is going to follow the lead of someone else's decision maker? This is the real information to figure out. And it's almost like this really enormous scratch off chart. I document these on projects, but I consider them to be like top secret IL6 level documents. Like I don't want to share them with anybody else besides myself. Of thinking through, again, like who are the decision makers, who are the influencers, what resources do people have, who controls the budget. And that can help you think through. It's a tool so that the next time that you're stuck or you need an approval, you can look at your real org chart. And again, it generally has nothing to do with kind of who technically reports to whom, and think through like, okay, I need 5 votes on this. There are out of 9 possible people. What are my pathways to get buy-in from those people through former colleagues, current friends, who has the procurement resources, who might not spend down their budget, who has a different goal that maybe I can help them with, right? So that then I have some political capital I can spend. What is my Myers-Briggs? I am an INTJ. I am like an off-the-charts INTJ. So really encourage mapping this out. I've done it in Mural. I've done it on a piece of paper. I don't think you need an official formal tool for this, but again, like a really effective one is one that you probably want to keep private, just because you may be documenting insights that help you get the job done, which is most critical, but that people may not love broadcasted. How do you tell people about yourself at a new organization to build trust? I honestly think a lot of this is just being human at first. When I started in government, I started at the Department of Education as the entrepreneur in residence. And my boss, Richard, and my other boss, Nick, and then Todd Park, everybody was like, just have lunch with people. Go have lunch and coffee with people. And I was so shy, because that I in INTJ is like very me, that I didn't do that for months. I was like, why would anybody want to talk to me? I have nothing to bring. Like, well, I'm not interesting. Like, blah, 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 blah. And now I have learned that like, just grab a cup of coffee. Just ask them about like their themselves, their family, their career path. Tell them about where you came from. Don't meet them for the first time and tell them that you're there to like save the day, or you have all these great ideas, or you've noticed all these broken things around. Like that's definitely not the way to build rapport, which is a mistake I've made myself many times. You just want to build a normal human relationship. And then something that you can do as an outcome of that, though, is to be like, who else should I meet? And very frequently, especially when folks have been around for a while, they may have sort of a contact in a totally uncharted territory because they used to be on the same team somewhere. And now that friend is in legal or procurement or at another agency. Approaching this in a remote work environment is a great question. So I would remind us all, like even when I was at the VA in a 12-story office building, if I was in my office and you were on the 6th floor, we often would talk on the phone or remotely, or not be able to see each other in person because the building was so large. And then you factor in that there was also another building at 1800 G where you may as well have been in California, like because you were 4 blocks away and it was humid as heck in DC in the summer. So I was not going to walk over to you. So first, I just sort of like think about your frame of reference on that a little bit, because I think people think that remote is a bigger jump than we actually were in before. But the second thing is, like, it definitely takes a little bit more work in a remote environment. And that can be like friendly back channel, like private messaging in a Zoom. It can be texting a little bit. It can be holding space at the start or end of meetings for a little bit of chit chat, so that you get to know people as humans. I now work in foster care, which is a state run. There's also Title 40 tribes. It is a state and local run system. And therefore, just again, the laws of physics, I can't be in all those places. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, oh, this is going to be even rougher because I'm not going to be able to like fly to New York or fly to California and build that FaceTime. And what I found worked really well was making that extra dedicated space for just human time. So chatting about someone's dog or their kid, inviting their kid to come give a presentation. I have seen many PowerPoint slides on Daniel Tiger. Just some way to be human. Which is really all of this boils down to. Like bureaucracy hacking is about having human relationships and working together and making space for that and building those. And I think it can work extremely well to the point that years into that kind of work, this has happened to me multiple times. I've like finally met someone in person and they've referred to that previous time that we were together in person. And I had to be like, we've never met before. We have only had a remote relationship. And I think that they can work well with a little bit of extra work. So another bureaucracy hacking tactic I found effective is showing the hard numbers. So often I find public or private sector, this is a problem everywhere. There can be a lot of emotional arguments or perspectives without underlying data ever existing. And my favorite story about this is my friend Lucia. She is a doctor and was a doctor in the United Kingdom for many years. And she felt like she wasn't making enough difference in people's lives, which is just a testament to how big Lucia's heart is. And Lucia wanted to help end the negative health effects of lead paint on children. And here in the United States and in many other countries, lead paint is, it's not a problem. It's still a problem in some places, but it is markedly less of a problem because we have had so many regulations around lead paint for many years. But she was concerned about the effects of lead paint on children in Africa, where these lead paint regulations, for the most part, did not exist. And so there was a lot of emotional banter about like, well, is it even a problem or not, or et cetera. And she bought a plane ticket, went to Botswana, went to Malawi, went to the paint store, bought paint on the shelf, and had it tested for like $100. And this led her, the plane ticket. Okay, so thousands of dollars, but not millions of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. And it turned out Malawi did not have lead paint, have lead in their paint. And if you traced why, it's because they imported their paint from South Africa, which had lead paint regulations for decades. But sorry, did I say it's Botswana that didn't? Malawi had lead in all the paint. And when she presented that data to the government, they implemented lead paint regulations in something like 90 days, which is extremely fast. But it was because the data didn't exist at all. And I have fallen prey to this too, where sometimes there's an emotional argument about whether something is a good idea or not. And if you can find a way to get data to show your case, that may not, but it may persuade your detractors, or it may prioritize an issue once that data is highlighted. We had a fairly crazy example of this when I was at the VA around healthcare enrollment. There are 20 million veterans in America. And when I was at the VA, there was an online healthcare application, but only 8 veterans had ever used it. Not 8 million out of 20 million, 8 out of 20 million. And the VA was like, well, we have data. It shows that veterans don't use the internet. And I did not believe that could possibly be true But fighting about it was not really going to get anybody anywhere, right? Because in theory, they had data. And what ultimately unlocked that was actually, in our case, qualitative data, which is we went out and sat and recorded actual veterans trying to use the form. And it turns out the form didn't open. So we only had 8 users because it didn't open. So now we had visual evidence that the website didn't work. And that is why we only had 8. That was enough to get us permission to launch a web version of the form that did work. And 2 million veterans have since used that form. So now we have different data on the fact that veterans don't use the internet. Interestingly, too, our research showed you may like stereotypically think like, okay, way more than 8 veterans probably use the internet, but probably a lot of older veterans don't use the internet, and probably a lot of younger veterans do. And our research kind of turned that on its head too, which was a lot of older veterans use the internet, and there was a large population of younger veterans that had gone off the grid and were actively disconnecting. And so we had to make sure that we had a pathway for them to access experiences, which we never had an expectation, and I still don't, that 100% of veterans will use va.gov, but I had an expectation that more than 8 would, and that has proven out. Yes, Alex, there is a video you put in the chat that's worth watching. I think it's a video of Dominic, who is an unhoused veteran who, with his permission, we were able to record him trying and failing to apply for VA healthcare online. It's a pretty, I didn't cast Dominic, he's real, but I could not have cast a funnier, tech savvier, kinder veteran to prove that like the problem was that our website did not open. It was not a problem on veterans' side. So another tactic to talk about is giving credit liberally. I think this works everywhere, but it especially works in the public sector. When somebody does anything to help your cause, they come to a meeting, they don't say no. Maybe they didn't say yes, but they didn't say no. They sign off on a piece of paperwork that you needed. They're willing to be a little bit creative. You want to pour positive recognition on them. And this is something that we don't do enough in the public sector. So what my team did at the VA, once I had a team, was we dedicated half an hour a week to crediting people who had helped us in some way. And this took a variety of forms, and in your particular agency, it will take its own form. But in our case, I would email our secretary, CCing the person that I wanted to give credit to and their boss. And I would say, oh my God, Secretary Bob, like Alexandra helped us so much on this thing. And Bob would write back, which was a time that, like, especially in an agency like the VA with 300,000 to 400,000 people, like you weren't really getting emails from the secretary possibly ever in a decades-long career. So that was exciting to get a reply from the secretary. He would then send a challenge coin to them. We would put promotion letters for step grade promotions in their file, which is something that nobody does. And if whatever your equivalent is at the state or local level, but at the federal level, I mean, a step grade promotion is permanently more money going forward. Like that is meaningful to people. And it's not a particularly hard thing to do, but people almost never do it. So thinking about that, generally recognizing people to their managers, submitting people for awards, FedScoop 50, Sammys, if you have an internal innovation award, employee of the month, anything like that, finding ways and making an active activity that you do regularly of rewarding people. It's not going to persuade everybody to do everything your way, but it really helps. If somebody does something a touch out of their comfort zone, and in response, they get a promotion and an email from the secretary and a challenge coin, that is the kind of reinforcement that you want. Jeffrey, indirect performance reviews for those who help you. Oh, there you go. That's a great idea too. So making a list. We had like literally kind of a catalog at the VA of all the different ways that you could recognize people. And that counts for outsiders too, like not just people at other agencies, but maybe someone on your contracting team did, like a team that you contract with did a really great job. Find a way to recognize them as well. And then it can only help, but this is something that people don't do nearly enough. A challenge coin. So they're custom, different federal agencies have them. Often individual leaders will have them. It's kind of a military thing. And the idea is if you are in a bar and you have the highest ranking challenge coin, everybody else has to buy your drinks. So the highest ranking coin would be the president of the United States. And then, oh boy, I'm guessing the vice president is like above the Secretary of Defense, but like, well, you have to sort that out among the people at the bar with you. But It was a very common thing at VA, and we made them like for the digital service, so people will make all sorts of interesting decorative coins, and then you kind of collect them. So understanding why. So I'd love to tell kind of a 3-tactic story around my foster care work, which I'm going to dramatically oversimplify a bit. But foster care is federally funded for the most part, but state administered. So similar to like SNAP and Medicaid and other benefit lines. And that means that every state is doing things in at least a slightly different way than another state. And one of the big things that I wanted to fix when I came into foster care was that it was a federal rule that if you are kin is a grandma, a grandpa, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, it could be a teacher or a baseball coach, someone that the child already knows and trusts, that if you're going to place a child in foster care with their kin, they have to meet the exact same standards as a stranger, a non-kin foster parent. And that sounds like straight, safe, and stringent until you get in the weeds of it and you realize that one of the requirements is income limits. So we will tell grandma, sorry, grandma, you don't make enough money for us to give you money. That's a very common one. Or grandma doesn't have enough square footage, or maybe a 17-year-old has to sleep on grandma's couch. That's now not allowed. And so this became a tremendous barrier in foster care. And what it meant at the end of the day is that a lot of kids in foster care were placed with kin, and that kin was getting no financial support. But it was about I was like, let's fix this. Like, obviously that's a problem. And everybody's like, oh yeah, obviously that's a problem. But getting to why that was a problem was like literally a multi-year effort of working with different states and trying to understand, okay, let's say that we want to change the square footage rule or the grandma's income rule. How do we change that? And digging into the baseline of like where its root cause was. And we do that in one state. And then we take that to another state and try to use kind of a domino effect of saying, okay, Oklahoma removed all these requirements for kin and they were able to. So Washington, let's get you to remove them. And then Washington being like, nope, we can't. And then why? Digging, digging, digging. And it turns out that the whole root of this after 3 years was the word or in a federal rule. That word or was ultimately like the barrier that just meant that like a bunch of states were not going to be able to add any more flexibilities as badly as they wanted to while that word existed. And if there's any legal nerds here, there's this amazing amount of legal precedent over the definition of the word or, which people have basically meant over time gotten to mean literally anything you want the word or to mean, which is bad. So we said, okay, we have to make a case to the feds to change this rule. We have to get the word or out of there. We have to, in fact, we're going to make a whole new sentence that's going to just in super plain language say what we want to say. And so we got 45 states together showing all this proof of why the word or was problematic, all the kinship caregivers that it would help. The federal government published a draft rule on Valentine's Day last year, and they finalized the new rule with no changes on September 28th of last year. And it is working extremely well because we got to the root cause of what was going on. We didn't pass a solution that sort of vaguely had the solution to it. We got to the root of the literal word in this case that was going on. So often, and I've definitely been guilty of this many times in our bureaucracies, we think we know the answer and we move too fast on the solution when it may be that there's actually still no underlying cause. A flip of that can be that when you get to the underlying source, you might find a lot more flexibility than you realize that you have. So I think I saw there's some folks from OPM here, the Office of Personnel Management, which is over federal hiring. When I started at the VA, one of the big arguments that I was having and big challenges I was having was hiring a technologist. And we had very intentionally had some of the best technologists in the world apply on USA jobs for our roles. And they never got past the resume review. And so that was the proof that I used to say like, hey, something is broken about our hiring process because the best technologists in the world can't get past step one. And at the time, all resume reviews were done by HR professionals at the VA. And they told me that it was federal law that they had to do it that way. And I said, well, couldn't we have technologists do the resume review so they can better gauge that person's skills and experience? And I was told, no, absolutely against federal law. Turns out when we had some meetings with some OPM officials, not against federal law, definitely allowed. And the VA since switched how it does most of its hiring, where now it has like psychiatrists do resume reviews for other psychiatrists, technologists do resume reviews for other technologists. And in that case, it was getting to the root policy. And when you read it, it gave you that flexibility, but it had been interpreted differently for so many years that nobody had gone back to the root cause. So in that example, we didn't need to change the root cause at all. We needed to highlight the root and say like, hey, actually, this gives us the flexibility and we want to keep with that. Michael, I bet it's still an issue in many places. I'm not saying we fixed federal hiring for good or at the state level, but at least we got technologists to do the resume review. So that was a step in the right direction. So a correlate is going second. Bureaucracies, in my experience, hate going first. They don't view it as a thing that they want to do. It's very risky. There's really no reward for going first on something. So it's about how can you frame the thing that you want to do as going second. And I took this as a quote from a child welfare director in a state who I had asked to do something that I considered to be absolutely zero risk, absolutely high reward. And they said to me, well, who else is doing it? And I said, nobody, like you'd be the first. And they were like, oh, no. I want to go second. Set it up for me to go second. And I'm going to go second. So first follower. Yes, that's another way to put it. And you could be really creative about going second. When I was at the VA, our culture was that like, if DOD did it, then we felt it pretty good that we could do it too. So I would very often be like, oh, well, DOD is doing it. Now it could have been like, really like a part of DOD that was like pretty much a stretch of like whether or not it was really a corollary, but that's okay because they did it. And so we could go second. If you are in a state or local government, this can be an even way more powerful tool. So this is what I did in foster care with the rule. The federal rule that I mentioned that fixed the word or, it's optional for states. They don't have to do it, but they could choose to do it. Every single state in the country, as well as every single Title 4E tribe, is in the process of implementing it. And again, the rule came out September 28th, and today is February 1st. And that was entirely because we use the power of positive peer pressure, of saying like, okay, to do this new thing, you have to do these two things. You're actually the 37th to do this, like not even the second. You're like 40th, 45th. Here's a form that 7 other states are doing. Here's regulation language that 19 other states already have. That has made the implementation infinity faster. And from their perspective, lower risk. And from my perspective, it's helping kinship caregivers and children much more efficiently too. So it's really a win-win-win-win. So thinking about however you can go second, wherever. Yes, exactly, Megan, where it hits critical mass, everyone else is doing it, why aren't you? And now we can use that as a change mechanism where I can be like, oh man, you're one of 4 states that's not doing this. Did you know that? And often that by itself will trigger it because at the state and local level, and to a lesser extent, federal agencies, they think everyone else is behaving the way that they are. They generally don't have a mechanism to test that. And if you can spend that energy to research, are we the 7th? Are we the 17th? Are we the 1st? You may be able to influence them to move a lot faster because now their risk framework has changed. If they are doing something because they believe everybody else is doing it, and they discover they are now 5% of who is doing it, they may flip rather quickly, actually, and want to change their behavior. And so thinking about public commitments, this can work with going second, but it has a few different flavors. So in the public sector, we often have outside commitments. Like at the VA, we would get companies to make veteran hiring commitments, and we would celebrate those outside of it. And then we could use that to drive some of our internal work and policies. You can also, again, this probably works better at the state and local level than the federal level, but with the federal rule on foster care I was just talking about, I made a map and I got every state to tell me that they were committed to doing it. And now I have a map that is basically all green. So for the small handful of states that kind of like weren't sure about it, they're now looking at this map being like, wait a minute, what? We can't be the last 3 that are doing this. Like we want to be green on this map too. I will caution, I've done a bunch of user research on this. The color green and red, people have feelings about them. They're generally not good feelings. My map for this was green because I knew everybody was going to be green. If you have something that's a little bit more contentious, people respond, in my experience, much better to the color orange. And that's a very strange tip, but we've A/B tested this a whole bunch on different foster care things where we're trying to get different states to move. And when they're red, they sort of like tune you out. And when they're orange or gray, they're a lot more likely to interact. So thinking about, can you get public commitments from other states, other agencies, from private partners? Maybe they can commit money or resources or hiring commitments, whatever it may be. We've seen this play out really well when you need to drive peer pressure towards your internal changes. So this is a more tactical tactic, as it were, doing the work outside the meeting. This is the one that I think people agree with, but give us the most pushback out of all of our 56. I think we have all been set up poorly by things like high school debate club, where there's a concept that like, you're going to show up in a meeting, you're going to make an impassioned, extemporaneous, persuasive speech, and you're going to win. That is not how meetings work. If you are going into a decision meeting and you do not know how every single decision maker is going to vote, and you have not teed up strategic questions or strategic support, you have not done the appropriate amount of work outside the meeting to make the meeting successful. I have phrased this a different way sometimes. It's like nothing ever happens in a meeting. Nick has encouraged me to rephrase that a little bit because some things can happen in a meeting, but basically like you should be able to predict with great certainty how a meeting is going to play out. And it took me at least a long time to accept this because it can mean that one hour meeting can be tens of hours of outside work, but that's the work. And part of this, it gets really strategic. Who are the decision makers? How many of their votes do you need? Who influences them? What is the correct order, right? Some people get really pissed off if they learn about something last. Some people kind of don't care if you don't tell them first. Some people, it's part of their identity being told first. How do they like to receive information? Do they want written? Do they want slide deck? Do they want to have a coffee with you? How far in advance do they need to be briefed? Who briefs them? Who do they listen to? Who do they trust? Can you maybe get coffee with one person's EA 2 weeks ahead? Do you get in their briefing book 7 days ahead? Like this is all knowable information. It can take you a while to figure out, but it is knowable information. And the more that you can act on it, the better. The lesson that I learned the hardest here sometimes was that you may not need everybody to vote yes. Right? You need to really understand like what the decision framework is. And my probably favorite story around this was when we were at the VA, some number of years into my time, we wanted to update our new website every day. And at the time, the VA updated their websites every 3 months. It was a quarterly cadence. And one of the required steps was that the change had to go through the change management committee. And so I tried basically every other tactic in this book to get the change management committee onto my side. I did lunch. I tried to cultivate the class. I tried to get to know them. I tried to earn political capital, on and on and on and on. And absolutely, they were like, no, I am never, ever voting yes on this idea that you're going to update the website every day. That's insane. And so every time there would be a vote, it would take them like 2 weeks to write back and vote no. And then we wouldn't move forward. And at some point, an embarrassingly long time into this battle, somebody pointed out to me that I did not actually need them to vote yes. I just needed them to vote. So I went back to them and I said, new idea. We want to deploy changes to the website every day. Every time we deploy a change, I will automatically include a memo that says you voted no on this change every single time. And they said, oh my God, we love that idea. Yes, we vote yes on your automatic no vote. So in this weird way, everybody won. I got to push changes to the website every 5 minutes if I wanted to. And they had none of the risk because every single time automatically it was going to be voted no, that they had not approved the change and they were against it. So that if anything ever happened, right, the risk framework was in their favor. Eventually that committee was disbanded. But I spent way too many months of my life trying to persuade them when the solution that we ended on was actually the much more elegant one, which is I didn't need them to vote yes at all. I just needed them to vote in basically instantaneous manner. So that it's a little bit of a crazy story, but like, should you want to think through whose votes do you actually need? Now, in terms of what should happen in the meeting, you could plant strategic questions. Like maybe you have a leader that, and this comes up a lot, the more senior a leader is, the less likely they are going to ask a basic question in front of other people. And so you may want to strategically plant questions in the audience so that people you need to hear the answer can hear the answer without having to be the person that asked it. You can also strategically plant support. You can have people, allies in the meeting, whether they're decision makers or just other attendees, make positive comments or share positive stories. You can have that scheduled in advance. And then my last little trick here is if you can influence it, you want to think about the order of the vote and also how the meeting minutes and the next steps are captured. Sometimes you will have someone that always votes no, for example, and if their last name starts with A and you always go alphabetically, you may be changing your vote simply by virtue of that. And so something that I do a lot is change up the strategic order so that you know that there's going to be a yes vote at the beginning. Or if you think about a dynamic of someone who maybe used to work for someone else for 25 years, that person should probably vote before their former boss, because they're going to have a dynamic that's going to be disagreeing with them after is going to be a different dynamic. That gets super sneaky, but sometimes you have to do this. It's just like, if you're aware of the possibilities, sometimes you have to do this. So, and then in terms of like the agenda, by no means, I am not saying that you should put lies in an agenda or lies in meeting minutes or anything like that. But sometimes the way that it's captured can influence the next steps. You can be more specific, you can be more accurate, you can assign yourself a task that nobody else wants, that then leads to you, drafting the first policy or drafting or running the next meeting, whatever it may be. There's a lot of work to do outside the meeting, but if you do it, you can accomplish like outsized goals in relatively short amounts of time. So this is my favorite tactic out of all 56. It's called strangling the mainframe. It sounds violent, but it is about, the strangler pattern is about fig trees and their root pattern. So this is not a violent tactic. But I think we have all probably been in many, many, many digital transformation projects or any sort of transformation project where there's like a 10-year plan, and we're going to capture every last requirement up front and it's going to be perfect. And then we're going to spend the next 8 years building the thing and it's going to be perfect. And that works 0.0% of the time. What works instead is this concept of strangling the mainframe. And the mainframe might be literally a mainframe in this case, or it might be a team or something else that's sort of a behemoth in your agency. And instead you want to say, okay, what is the smallest part of functionality that I can carve out and I can replace? Is anybody here familiar with Harry Potter? Generally, yes. Okay. If for some reason you have not read Harry Potter and you want to, you should mute me for the next 90 seconds because I'm going to give you a very big spoiler. So my favorite analogy for explaining strangling the mainframe is Voldemort. So Voldemort is the mainframe. Huge problem. Everybody, the entire wizarding world is trying to get rid of Voldemort. And they spend the first 6.5 books doing a waterfall modernization project. They're putting all their resources and time and energy just straight at replacing Voldemort and getting rid of him whole hog. What happens? Most of Harry's family dies. There's billions of pounds of Muggle property damage. Voldemort is stronger than ever. Doesn't work. What does work? Again, spoiler, is the Horcruxes. They discover that Voldemort's power is actually in discrete. It's in like a tiara here, it's in a necklace here, it's in a snake here. And if you can kill them off one by one, at the end, you can absolutely destroy Voldemort. So thinking about that, and like, I'll give a concrete example. When my crisis consulting firm went into California to help with the unemployment claims backlog in the height of the pandemic, it was going to take 48 years to work down the backlog, which is probably an unacceptable amount of time, right? And we got that down in a month to 3 months. 48 years to 3 months. And there were a few different ways we did that, but one of the main ones was recognizing that everybody wanted to know their claim status. That was the thing. They were calling, they were waiting on hold all day. They were resubmitting claims over and over and over because they wanted to know their claim status. And so the team built a claim status tracker and kind of hooked it on the side. It was up in 10 days. It synced with the mainframe once a night. So it didn't require, like, we could put it on a normal cloud computing platform that could handle people hitting refresh all day, whereas the mainframe would have collapsed And that would have been really, really extra bad for processing claims, right? And critically, the status claim tracker translated the status codes into plain language. Because what was happening is people were calling in, they'd wait on the phone for, I'm not making this up, 6, 7, 8 hours. They would get the claims person on the phone, and that person would be like, oh, your claim is in status 102.B. And then you'd be like, well, what does that mean? And it'd be like, I don't know. That's all the information that I have too. So a lot of this work for strangling this mainframe, I mean, yes, it was standing up a claim status tracker and doing a nightly sync with the mainframe, but critically, it was translating all the codes to plain language. And then a next step. Oh, EDD staff, hello, that is awesome. I'm glad that the tracker is still there and working. And I think that that's one of my favorite examples of the strangler pattern because it solved a really acute, huge problem with a very down and dirty tech solution. And a lot of it, again, was not really tech at all. It was translating all the error codes, which across the employment department, most employees didn't know what all the codes meant. Because like you'd have a certain specialization, right? You'd know what these codes were, but you wouldn't necessarily ever deal with claims that had these kind of claim codes on them. So thinking about this is really our strategy for building what's now va.gov. And I think I saw the va.gov team members on here. We did not try to put every single benefit line at the VA online at once. We started with the GI Bill comparison tool, and then we folded on a little bit of the employment center articles that I mentioned, 1,000 of those. And then we folded on the healthcare application. And then we folded on more like bits and pieces of functionality. And that to me is like the only way that these projects work is strangling the mainframe one chunk at a time. Ed is wondering about when you're strangling the mainframe, how do you get the different pieces incorporated into the main or official system? I think you have to consider that as you're building your Horcrux. So you're probably going to need some way to connect back to the system. But too often people like way overcomplicate that technically. They think like, okay, we're going to need to build an API, or like we're going to need to do, we're going to get an enterprise service bus or something like that. Mainframes are wicked good at spitting out and sucking in CSV files. So if you can build your Horcrux around that concept to start, you can still integrate with the whatever the current IT system is without trying to replace it, getting all the functionality that you want off on the side, and getting the data syncing that you want. If you can't do that, I would maybe encourage finding some different Horcruxes first to build up your muscle and your political capital to kind of go after the more complicated one. If your solution is too far off in the forest, it risks dying because it won't be official enough. And so thinking it's hard to generalize about that too much, but like it still worked. Like the 2-week thing for the status claim tracker in California was largely, I mean, there was a pandemic and also a wildfire and a deadly heat wave and like a backlog. There were a lot of things that helped make it go really quickly. It very well may be that your Horcrux still takes months, but it will work if you design it well and thoughtfully, and you make sure that you get the approvals and the system integrations that you need. You should be successful in probably years less than it would take to do a larger project. And also, I generally don't believe that the larger projects are ever successful. So your success rate will be greater than 0. So using the bureaucracy against itself, this is sort of a meta tactic, but it goes to kind of what I just said about having a solution out in the forest. It's really tempting when we're trying to innovate in an agency to say like, okay, I'm just going to work over here in the shadow. And I'm not going to do all that IT paperwork because, oh my God, it seems like a 6-month process and it will take forever. And I'm just going to kind of work over here. But the most powerful bureaucracy hack is when you use the bureaucracy against itself. When you rewrite the policy, when you change the form, when you change the regulation so that what you want people to do and you believe the right thing to do is now the path of least resistance and lower risk. And if somebody wants to come along and undo it, they now have to do at least that much work, if not more work, to undo it. We had a lot of examples here around cloud computing at the VA, which when I was there was definitely not allowed by anyone for at least 2 reasons. One was the inspector general said that you couldn't put the cloud in an evidence bag because when they did their investigations, they would want to walk into the room, pick up your server, put it in an evidence bag, carry it out with them. And they were like, well, I can't do that with Google Cloud or Amazon Web Service or anything. So of course that's not allowed. And then the second piece was that the forms for getting your website application approved had questions like, did you, Marina, personally jiggle the doorknob to make sure that it was locked? Well, if you try to jiggle the doorknob of Amazon Web Services, they will have you arrested. And also there are a lot of doors and like it's very, very complicated. And I spent a long time smashing my head against that steel wall until I realized I should be doing this bureaucracy hack, which was saying, okay, the form about jiggling the doorknob doesn't work. I can't get past it. I've tried submitting it blank. I've tried submitting it with it saying like not approved. Sorry, not applicable. I've tried metaphorically explaining how I am conceptually jiggling the doorknob through security controls, and every single time it would get sent back. What did work was saying like, well, wait a minute, where does this form even come from? And I learned that there was a 4-person committee that oversaw form changes. And so we went to them and explained what we were trying to do. They understood it, and we actually changed the form itself. While we were changing the form to allow for cloud computing, we also took care of a few other things that we had noticed were problems over the years. For example, VA servers tended to have business hours. They were often in mop closets underneath fire sprinklers with no backups. So while we were changing the form to remove the doorknob jiggling question, we added in some questions about like, hey, do you have a backup? Are you under a fire sprinkler? Et cetera, so that now people were incentivized to have best practices that we believe to be correct. And also we spent 2 years working with the Inspector General on the evidence bag challenge to include me sort of cheekily making cloud-shaped sugar cookies and putting them in evidence bags and handing them out at the Christmas party. But ultimately, when we showed them how there's different tools, how they could conduct their investigation in the cloud without ever having to pick up a computer, which is better for everybody's backs, they issued a memo that said they preferred logical access over physical access for conducting investigations. I wish all of you in your career get an Inspector General memo, because that is to date probably the most powerful thing I've ever gotten done, and it felt amazing. And so now, right, we had shifted the bureaucracy itself. Now the Inspector General wanted what we were doing instead of fighting what we were doing. So really thinking through how whatever change you are trying to make, you can solidify in the bureaucracy. Don't hide in the shadows. It will take longer. It will be more work, but it can permanently change the trajectory of your agency or your team if you use the bureaucracy against itself. So I will stop here and maybe we can go through some questions. And Hannah, do you want to do that in a particular format? I know I answered some kind of as we went.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marina. This was fantastic. Let me just stop the recording.